Well, welcome to Los Angeles. I know this is an unusual way to welcome you here with a hurricane warning flag. I mean, LA has weather, but it's sunny, earthquake, mudslide, sunny, not a lot of hurricanes. But I grew up on the other coast. I grew up in Miami. I grew up with hurricanes, and hurricane season actually started 6 days ago. It's the kind of thing you know when you grow up in Miami. And you know it's going to be a doozy of a season when the first named storm of the year, Hurricane Alberto, makes landfall before the official hurricane season has even started. I've been thinking a lot about how natural disasters, even though they're devastating for the people who experience them, really seem to bring out the best in people. I mean, just think about Hurricane Harvey, which is coming up on its 1-year anniversary. Is there anyone here from Houston? Anybody? Cheer out, because I can't really see you with those lights on. Excellent. Hurricane Harvey was one of the largest and most devastating hurricanes in US history, dumping 60 inches of rain on Houston in a matter of hours, leaving people stranded, flooded, and in search of higher ground. And random people who could have just stood by as the waters rose instead sprung into action. They made daring rescues, and they launched their boats to bring people to safety. The Houston business community got in on the act, of course. A local Pizza Hut franchisee baked 120 pies and delivered them via kayak to hungry, stranded residents. A local furniture company turned a couple of its showrooms into shelters for about 400 people, half of whom had been rescued by that furniture company's delivery trucks. Lots of businesses engaged in these kinds of efforts. The banks in town all said they would waive overdrafts and late fees as an example. But BBVA Compass really went above and beyond. With many of the bank's branches and its customers' homes underwater, they knew that customers were going to have a hard time getting to the bank to make deposits. And so they decided to change their mobile app. They decided to increase the deposit limit on mobile deposits. In other words, how much money someone could deposit by taking pictures of their check on their phone. Now, think about, in normal times, how long a relatively small change like that would take to get through the technology queue, let alone legal and compliance and risk. But BBVA got it done in 48 hours, despite the fact that they had to make that available for the entire state of Texas, not just Houston, and were opening themselves up to some risk. In the days following the storm, Wall Street analysts began projecting the losses that Houston area corporations could face in the following quarter. But none of that really influenced the actions of the Pizza Hut franchisee, the furniture gallery owner, BBVA Compass. They acted immediately in the short run, probably losing more money than they might have otherwise. And that's because in a natural disaster, we operate instinctively, doing whatever it takes to get through the crisis in the short run, knowing that the long term depends on it. So here's what I want you to consider today. If that's how we react in a natural disaster, how do we react in an unnatural disaster? I'm talking about a disaster of our own making. This may look familiar to some of you. This is the May 2016 cover of the Atlantic Monthly magazine. And in it, writer Neil Gabler confesses that he was one of the 47% of Americans who told the Federal Reserve that he couldn't come up with $400 in an emergency. If there's one statistic I hear quoted more frequently, one statistic that absolutely screams disaster, it's that one. There is no denying it. We are in the middle of a financial health disaster. And the waters are rising. But this time, we're the ones on higher ground. And what I want to know is, where are the people springing into action? Where are the heroic rescues? Where are the lifeboats? It is obvious that our success as an economy, as a democracy, as a country depends on our solving this crisis. Why is it that we are so challenged to respond? Well, for one, we are living in the 5-minute news cycle. It is really difficult to think about next year, let alone next quarter, when we honestly don't know what alert we're going to get on our phones in the next 5 minutes. We are always rushing around, pressed for time, complaining that we have no time or space to think or to plan. CFSI was founded to answer the question of how technological advances could help people that need it most. And the fact is, technology has a lot going for it. But technology can also cause short-sightedness, leading us to focus on the minutia of the moment and robbing us of time and perspective. You know, we like to say that we're the ones leveraging technology, but the fact is, it's usually the other way around. Technology is leading us around like a dog on a leash. But the fact is, we can't really blame technology on its own. Personally, here's who I blame: Milton Friedman. Back in 1970, this famous economist penned an article in the New York Times in which he asserted that the only legitimate social responsibility of a corporation was to maximize profits. Friedman's article and his thinking was really an early beachhead in a broader intellectual movement around the idea that unfettered capitalism was the best way to promote social well-being. Now, that doesn't seem like a very novel idea today, and in fact, we are the living embodiment of the success of that intellectual movement. But when Friedman first wrote that article, there was a very different sentiment, a very different attitude in the country, particularly among CEOs. That was really well documented in my friend Rick Wartzman's book, The End of Loyalty. Back then, we're talking about the post-World War II era. The boys are just coming home from war. And CEOs really believed that it was their responsibility to help generate full employment. The thinking went something like this: if I create a lot of good jobs, the people I hire, those workers, will become good consumers. They'll have money to spend on the things that I'm producing. And that will create more demand. That will cause me to hire more people. And that will cause yet more spending. That will help the communities and the neighborhoods, and so on and so forth, in a virtuous circle. Now, back then, the big titans of industry absolutely believed that government had a role to play in creating a basic safety net. But they thought it was their responsibility to take care of the bulk of workers' needs. And so that meant the invention of things like vacation and sick pay, pensions and profit sharing, life insurance, health insurance provided through the workplace. CEOs believed that it was their responsibility to balance four sets of stakeholders: customers, employees, the communities in which they operated, and shareholders, in that order. Pulling off a balancing act like that really required longer-term thinking. But Friedman's approach, coupled with the rapid pace of life fueled by technology, has led to ever-increasing short-term thinking and an incredibly singular focus on the shareholder. Gone are the days when industry worried about full employment and the rising tide lifting all boats. Now the focus is on next quarter's earnings call. We compensate corporate executives primarily based on stock market performance, and the holding time of the average stock is declining with every passing day, from years to months to now seconds. We're really living in the on-your-own economy. Jacob Hacker, an economist, described it as the great risk shift, in which over the last 40 years, consumers have increasingly had to shoulder responsibilities that were once borne by government and business. Neil Gabler, the Atlantic writer, really summed it up well when he said, in the 1950s and 60s, America's economic strength democratized prosperity. And in the 2010s, we've somehow managed to democratize financial insecurity. Think about it. Wages have essentially been flat in this country since 1972. And today, nearly half of the American workforce makes less than $15 an hour. I've done the math, and that is just over $30,000 a year. The savings rate in this country peaked in 1971 at 13%, and today it stands at 2.4%. In the 60s and early 70s, credit card debt was virtually unheard of. Today, average credit card debt stands at $5,500, and that's a 6-year high. The American Psychological Association conducts a survey to see how stressed out people are. 67% say that they have some level of anxiety about being able to pay their bills. And that was up 11 points over last year. I could go on quoting statistics, but by any measure, America's financial health is a disaster of epic proportions. Now, let me provide a refresher for a moment. We define financial health as having a day-to-day system, a strong one, that enables you to build resilience and pursue opportunity. And over the last few years, we've spent a lot of time focusing on that day-to-day system and on the real pain points that consumers face: volatile incomes, tight cash flow, no savings, poor credit. And we have made some progress. Through our Financial Solutions Lab, we've seeded over 36 companies, many of whom are paving new ground in thinking about how to address these challenges. And I'm really excited that we're going to announce tomorrow the next cohort of companies. Members of our Financial Health Network and beyond have been inspired by these ideas, and in many cases have either partnered with fintechs to implement them or have built their own. But we've been operating as if we assume that by focusing on day-to-day systems, we'll automatically get resilience and opportunity. And the fact is, while day-to-day financial management is essential, no matter how much we strengthen it, it alone will not produce financial health. We need all three ingredients to get there. But we're just so stressed, barely able to make it through the week. There is no slack and no time, and managing the day-to-day just takes everything people have got. And so that's really the link that's broken. The link between today and tomorrow, between the present and the future. How can we help consumers and the companies that serve them reconnect that link between managing their day-to-day and weathering storms and getting ahead? For instance, about 60% of Americans have experienced a financial shock of some kind in the last 5 years. And if I asked many of you how you would handle that shock, you would probably say insurance. But that's not actually a very common answer. We've actually just completed some research work with the support of the Prudential Foundation, which we'll be sharing at a lunch tomorrow. And not surprisingly, we found that Americans are underinsured. But here's actually the bigger problem. The bigger problem is that 13%, only 13%, say they would actually rely on insurance to manage a shock. That includes people who already own insurance. Only 13%? Well, in focus groups, people told us that they just don't know if they can actually rely on their insurance. They don't know whether, when they finally have a crisis, whether insurance will actually be there to cover it. It's like the person who walks around with an umbrella not knowing if it's going to open or not. And so, why would anyone buy insurance if they didn't actually think it was going to work when they needed it? So what can we do to redesign insurance products to provide some kind of guarantee, to give people the peace of mind that insurance is supposed to provide, and thus increase take-up of insurance in the first place? Similarly, it's really hard to think about getting ahead when getting by is getting in the way. This really plays out on college campuses, particularly community colleges, where the vast majority of students are working adults, many of them with children. And studies show that about 71% of community college students drop out because they need to make more money. What can we do to help students balance their day-to-day financial realities with their studies and their trying to get ahead? Well, with the support of the MetLife Foundation, we have brought together a cohort of community colleges and state universities who are going to leverage the data that they already collect on students to try to assess their financial health and identify those who are most at risk of dropping out because of a financial challenge, and then try to develop interventions to keep that from happening. Because sometimes as little as $300 for that semester's books can make the difference between debt with nothing to show for it and a degree that opens up future opportunities. We need more ideas like these to help reconnect consumers' day-to-day financial systems with their ability to weather storms and get ahead. As CFSI has started focusing more heavily on resilience and opportunity, it has taken us into conversations with a much broader array of stakeholders who have a stake in financial health: colleges, insurance companies, hospitals, housing organizations, employers, gig platforms, Consumers' financial lives are inordinately complex and interwoven. And the financial health ecosystem needs to mirror that interconnectedness, that complexity, if we're going to help move the needle. So now, what about the companies that serve those customers? What can they do to help reestablish the link between their day-to-day decisions and long-term value creation? This guy's got the answer. This is Larry Fink. He's the CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, and that makes that company a top shareholder in pretty much every company. Fink has been writing about the ills of short-term thinking for several years now in his annual letter to CEOs. But this year's letter was different. This year, Fink made it clear that the way to generate long-term value for shareholders is to focus on your customers, your employees, and the communities in which you operate. He's really urging CEOs to both create and share their long-term plans, both to provide context for their day-to-day decision-making and to provide a basis for measuring whether those decisions and how those decisions are ultimately going to drive long-term value. I think financial health is a long-term outcome we all should be holding ourselves accountable to, and that organizing strategy around it is what's going to help companies weather the storms of disruption and come out ahead. That's why at CFSI, we have been so focused on measurement. Over the last 4 years, we have built a financial health measurement system. And in fact, tomorrow, we will be releasing a new component of it, a new and improved financial health score toolkit. But already dozens of our network members have made the commitment to use our methodology in measuring the financial health of their own customers and in some cases their employees. Time and time again, we have seen the mindset shift that happens when a company truly understands the financial health of its customers and has to reckon with its role in that. It drives longer-term thinking because financial health isn't a project that you're going to take on for a quarter or for a year and be done. Instead, it's a constant, ongoing, virtuous circle in which improving the financial health of your customers drives institutional health. And that's not unlike the approach taken by CEOs back in the post-war years. A few months ago, an organization called the Long Now Foundation began installing a 10,000-year clock inside a mountain in West Texas, this is it, on land owned by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. This is actually a prototype of the clock. You can see it in a museum in London. This sprung from the mind of computer scientist Daniel Hillis. His idea was to build a mechanical clock that would tick once a year, bong once a century, and send the cuckoo out once every millennium. The idea was to create a counterpoint to today's accelerating culture and to help make long-term thinking the norm. What an incredible thought exercise that this group is now turning into reality. And what I love about this is that they have found the perfect link between the very moment-to-moment, day-to-day exercise of keeping time the way we think about it today with a real vision and sense of urgency for the future. If we're going to get to the long now, we have to act right now. And so here at Emerge, in sunny LA, I'm going to invite you to imagine that you're in the eye of a hurricane. That moment where everything is calm and still and quiet, and time seems to stretch beyond its bounds. Now is the time to put aside today's trivialities and focus on the future. Now is the time to focus on resilience and opportunity. Now is the time for visionaries. The waters are rising, and we are the ones we've been waiting for. Thanks very much.